Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montevilla Sewing Center, and today we're talking about the Pfaff Expression 710. In this video, I'm going to show you how to get started sewing on this machine. So to start with, when you first turn on your machine, you're going to get a straight stitch. It just wakes up to that stitch, and it's a normal center needle position and a garment stitch length of about 2.5 millimeters. Now these here are how you can change that needle position off to the side or bring it back to the center and over to the other side. You can also change your stitch length to make it much shorter or really long if you're going to do like basting or something like this. Also, this here is for changing your thread tension. Now that would be useful if you're sewing with thread that's maybe a thick thread at the top and a thinner thread in your bobbin. Then you may want to adjust that, but most of the time I just leave it at the default. Now if you've changed these here and you want to get back to the default settings, rather than just pushing the buttons until you get white numbers on a dark background, you can simply go to your menu and reselect that stitch. Now in your menu, you can see that the pictures of the stitches that you want are right there. So all you need to do, say for instance you want zigzag, there you go, right there. And you can widen and narrow your zigzag. You can also make it a shorter zigzag. Now that's all the shorter this zigzag can go. So if you're going to do applique, choose a different stitch. And I'll show you which one that is. That's this one right here, number 9. So number 9 can even be made shorter if you want to. Or you can just leave it at default, and it can also be made narrower. I usually like to make mine a little bit narrower and a little bit closer together. Notice up here it talks about what foot to use. You want to use your 2A foot. Right now we have the 0A foot on our machine. Okay, so let's get back into regular sewing. The way you do that, press menu, and then you go to, as long as it's in essential stitches. Now down here, notice it says 1, 1, 1. That means it's in group number 1, category or row, column, I guess, number 1, and then it's the first one in that column. Okay, so for regular sewing, I got quilting cotton here, and to put down your presser foot, you use this button right here. There's no lever that you just use these buttons right here. Now if you are trying to sew in a precise place, start in the precise place, press this a second time, and you can move your fabric right to where you want it to be, and then press it again. Also, if you start sewing with your presser foot up, it will lower your presser foot automatically. This machine will. Okay, so we start sewing. I want to put a back stitch at the beginning. Press and hold like this. I get down here to the end of my sewing, and let's say I want to put a back stitch in here. If I press and hold this and then let it up, notice it keeps back stitching. That's because I stopped. So I'm going to, and there's my indicator. That means it's sewing in reverse. So I'm going to press that again to make that sew forward again. This time I'm going to move into a different spot. So I'm going to show you how to make a back stitch at the end here. So I'm going to go forward, and I'm going to sew slowly as I approach the end and press the button and release it. Notice I was sewing. It was in motion while I was pressing this. So that's important. Now, once you're done sewing, you can just lift up your presser foot, pull your fabric to the side, and pull from back to front to cut your thread. There's a little thread cutter right here. Now another way that you can put a locking stitch or like a small back stitch at the beginning is by using this button right here. I'll show you how that works. Press your foot down. If I push this button here and start sewing, watch what it does. It makes a little stitch back forward, and then it stops, lift my foot up, and I can start sewing. At the end, I can press that again, and I just keep my foot on the pedal until it's done sewing. There, it stopped. Then I can also press my cutter button here. What that does, it cuts the thread, lifts the needle, lifts the foot. There we go. And it makes a nice, neat little stitch right here, fairly secure, a little less noticeable than this one here. And I think it's actually a little bit nicer just because it's a little bit easier. You can actually stop sewing, press that button, and then put your foot down on the pedal. So, you know, a little bit easier. There's another way you can kind of build this into the beginning of your seam, and that's this right over here. If you touch this little icon, it opens up these possibilities. So if I push this, now we're going to have one of those little locking stitches at the beginning. If I push this, we're going to have once I do a locking stitch, press of the button at the end, it will also cut the thread after it does the locking stitch. So it's a time saver. Now in this particular straight stitch, you don't really need to do that. In some of your sequencing stitches, you may need to do that in some of your decorative stitches. But in this one, I'll show you how by just doing that. And you don't need to close this window. You certainly can, but you don't need to close that window to start sewing. So here we go. I'm going to show you this time without even putting my presser foot down. I'm just going to start pressing on the pedal and it starts sewing. Okay. I sew about up to here. Press this button here, this locking stitch button. Keep my foot on the pedal. It does the locking stitch, cuts the thread, lifts up the needle. It lifts up the foot. And see, the thread tails are about like this. Now for me, I would probably just go ahead and trim those off, but in some garments where you don't need to worry about those thread tails, it looks fine on the outside, and that's all you really need to do. And then you could just cut off your little thread tail at the beginning. And you can see it's fairly short here. After it's done the automatic cut, like I did over here, we have this little short thread tail. I wouldn't even worry about that. Okay, now what about zigzag? Okay, so to get into zigzag, I kind of already showed you about how to do that. Right here, normally I use this. If I wanted to do no locking stitch, I could do that at the beginning. Of course, turn that off. It's just going to start zigzagging. You can do your reverse button if you want to, or you can build in that little locking stitch at the beginning. I kind of like that, but if you're stitching on the edge of your fabric, you want to make sure that you're into the fabric, not off the edge when you do your locking stitch. And same thing at the end here. Your last stitch, if it's off the edge of the fabric and you do a locking stitch, it may not sew the way you want it to do. Okay, so this is your start-stop button, and this will work whether or not you have your foot control plugged in. It's a nice handy feature to have when you're doing buttonholes or something like that, and that's another video. We'll get into that too. Now the needle down button is really nice to have. I'm going to go needle down, okay? When you've got needle down, you've got this pivot function that you can do. So if I start sewing, okay, it stops with needle down, and I can turn, take a look at my stitches, make sure everything looks the way I want it to be. Oh, maybe I want it to have a little bit wider, a little bit longer, something like that. And then I can keep sewing. I don't have to put the foot down. It will automatically go down. Now if I have this up like this, it drops the foot down onto the fabric. That way, either the needle, depending on what you choose to do here, either the needle or the foot is going to hold your fabric in place so you don't lose your place while you're sewing. Now this here I didn't mention, I mentioned it in a different video, but I'll mention this now. This is a really nice feature to have once you're getting used to your machine, because here's full speed. That means if you press on the pedal all the way to the floor, it's going to zoom really fast. To go slower, you have to kind of back off on that a little bit. Well, I'd like to have a little more precision when I'm doing free motion quilting or applique, so I'll turn this on to make it go a little bit slower. This little triangle right here means press and hold it a little longer, and if I wanted it to go really slow, when I ask it to go slow, there we go. You can move that little slider down there. On the other hand, if I only wanted it to go a little bit slower, then I could bring this up right here. So now you can see those little bars there. It's filled up, so it's only slightly slower. I'm going to go back to making it about half speed when I want it to go slow. That's a nice feature to have. That way you're not moving a speed slider all the time. You just have one button to push there. Now, I mentioned in a previous video about this one here. This one again has to do with sequencing. Sequencing is where you have a sequence of stitches like letters and symbols, and this will help you get back to the beginning. For most regular sewing, you're not going to be using this button here. But the other buttons, you are going to be using those for your regular sewing and zigzagging and mending and things like that. So I hope you found this video to be helpful. If you have, give us a thumbs up. And if you have comments or questions, you can leave those in the area down below. We have lots of other videos on this machine and on other machines here on our Montevilla YouTube channel, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye.